Your father-in-law has no authority here, Daniel. My son-in-law said it so casually that for a second, I thought I had misheard him. We were standing in the executive conference room on the 32nd floor of a glass tower overlooking Chicago. Around the table sat 7 senior executives, 2 lawyers, and the company's outside auditor. And me. Daniel didn't even look at me when he said it. He was staring at the quarterly projections on the screen, one hand resting confidently on the polished conference table. Then he turned toward me. Mr. Carter, with all due respect, you're not part of management. So I'd appreciate it if you stopped questioning decisions you don't understand. Nobody spoke. I looked down at the folder in front of me. There was one document inside. A document Daniel had never seen. A document that proved the company he was running as CEO didn't belong to him. It belonged to me. And he was about to find out. But not yet. Because by that point, I had already learned something far more important than the fact that my son-in-law was abusing his position. He wasn't doing it alone. Thank you for joining us here on Father's Hidden Reckoning. Your support truly means a lot to us. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from today. Drop your city or country in the comments below. Please note that this story contains fictional elements created for entertainment and educational purposes. Any similarities to real people, names, places, or events are purely coincidental. However, the message and lesson behind this story may be something that stays with you long after the story ends. My name is Thomas Carter, and for 28 years, I built Carter Industrial Solutions from a rented warehouse with 3 employees into a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But 5 years before the day Daniel embarrassed me in that conference room, I had stepped away from the business. Not because I was tired, not because I was sick, and certainly not because I had stopped caring. I stepped away because my wife, Elaine, was dying. She had spent 31 years beside me while I built that company. She was there when I worked 14-hour days. She was there when I came home smelling like machine oil. She was there when we nearly lost everything during the recession. And when she got sick, I made her a promise. For the first time in my life, the company could wait. She couldn't. I transferred operational control to a professional management team and quietly moved into the background. The ownership structure was complicated, but intentionally so. A family trust held the controlling shares. I was the trustee, and only 3 people knew the full arrangement. My attorney, Robert Hale, my accountant, Margaret Shun, and me. My daughter, Emily, knew I still owned a substantial interest in the company. She didn't know how much. Daniel knew even less. At least, that's what I believed. I met Daniel at Emily's house the first time she brought him home. He was 38, handsome, polished, and extremely confident. He wore an expensive navy suit, even though Emily had told him we were just having dinner. He shook my hand firmly. "Mr. Carter," he said, "I've heard a lot about you." I smiled. "Hopefully nothing too terrible." He laughed. "No, actually, Emily talks about you all the time." I glanced at my daughter. She smiled. That smile mattered to me. I had spent most of Emily's childhood working, and there were years when I worried that I had missed too much. So when she looked happy with Daniel, I gave him the benefit of the doubt. At dinner, he asked me questions about the company. Not unusual. He wanted to know how I had started it. I told him about the warehouse, the first contract, the first major client, the year we nearly went bankrupt. He listened carefully. Too carefully, perhaps. At one point, he leaned forward. "So you still own the company?" I paused. "I still have an interest in it." "What percentage?" Emily immediately looked at him. "Daniel." "What?" he said. "I'm just curious." I smiled. "Enough to make retirement comfortable." He laughed. I suppose that's one way of putting it. At the time, I didn't think much about that sentence. Years later, I would remember it word for word. After Elaine passed away, Emily became the center of my world, and Daniel became part of the family. I tried. I really did. I invited them for Sunday dinners. I helped them with their first house. When their son, Noah, was born, I spent nearly every weekend driving across town just to see him. Daniel always seemed grateful, but there was something about him that never quite settled with me. He respected money. He respected titles. He respected powerful people. But he didn't seem to respect the people who had built those things. One evening, about 18 months after Emily and Daniel married, I mentioned that I had been thinking about visiting the company's headquarters. Daniel looked up from his phone. Why? The question caught me off guard. Because I haven't been there in a while. You don't need to go. I laughed. I know. He didn't laugh. The company is going through a lot of changes right now. That's exactly why I'd like to see what's happening. Daniel put his phone down. Tom, you're retired. There was nothing cruel about the way he said it. That almost made it worse. He said it like he was correcting a child. I know I'm retired. Then let the people running the business run it. I looked at him for several seconds. Who are the people running it? He smiled. People who understand what the company needs today. Emily looked uncomfortable. Daniel. He shrugged. I'm just saying. I'll let it go. That became my habit. I'll let things go. A comment here. A dismissive look there. A meeting I wasn't invited to. A decision made without consulting me. Every time, I told myself the same thing. He's my son-in-law. Emily loves him. Don't turn every disagreement into a family war. And for a while, that worked. Then Daniel became CEO. The board appointed him after the previous CEO resigned unexpectedly. I wasn't opposed to it. In fact, I initially supported him. He had a strong resume. He understood corporate finance. He knew how to negotiate. He was ambitious. And, more importantly, I thought giving him responsibility would make him feel trusted. That was my first mistake. My second was assuming ambition and loyalty naturally went together. Within a year, things began changing. Daniel started replacing longtime employees, people I had hired personally, people who had stayed with the company through its hardest years. One of them was a man named Frank Morales. He started as a forklift operator and eventually became head of logistics. When I heard he had been fired, I called Daniel. Why? Performance. Frank. Yes. I've known Frank for 24 years, and I've known him for 4. There was a pause. Daniel, if you're going to make changes, fine, but don't destroy institutional knowledge just to prove you're in charge. He sighed. That's exactly the problem, Tom. Everyone keeps comparing me to you. I didn't know what to say. He continued. I can't run the company if everyone thinks I'm just occupying your chair. You're not occupying my chair. That's not how it feels. I lowered my voice. Then earn your own. Silence. That was the last pleasant conversation we had for months. After that, Daniel became colder, and Emily became distant. Not intentionally. Daniel started telling her that I was interfering, that I was trying to control the company from retirement, that I didn't trust him. And eventually, Emily began repeating those words. One Sunday afternoon, she came to my house alone. She sat across from me in the living room. Dad, Daniel feels like you don't respect him. I respect him enough to tell him when I think he's making a mistake. That isn't the same thing. No, I said quietly. It isn't. She folded her hands. He thinks you want him to fail. That couldn't be further from the truth. Then maybe stop questioning everything he does. I looked at my daughter. Emily, have you ever asked him why I question it? She didn't answer. That was the first moment I realized something had changed. Not in the company. In my family. Daniel wasn't just trying to control the business. He was controlling the story Emily heard about me. And he was doing it slowly, carefully. One conversation at a time. I still didn't confront him. Instead, I started paying attention. And once I started paying attention, I noticed things I couldn't unsee. Expenses that didn't make sense. Consulting contract with companies I had never heard of. A sudden increase in executive compensation. A new private aviation arrangement. Large legal expenses. And one consulting firm in particular. Redwood Strategic Advisory. The company had received nearly $2.4 million from Carter Industrial Solutions in less than 14 months. I asked Margaret Chin about it. She didn't answer immediately. That bothered me. Margaret. She closed the file. Tom, you should talk to Robert. Why? Because I don't want to speculate. That was when I knew something was wrong. Margaret had been my accountant for 16 years. She never speculated. She dealt in numbers. If she was telling me to speak with Robert, she wasn't concerned about a rounding error. She was concerned about something she couldn't put into writing. The next morning, I called Robert Hale. He asked me to come to his office. I arrived at 9. He didn't offer coffee. That was unusual. Robert was 71 and had been my attorney since the company was worth less than $10 million. He closed his office door. Tom, how much does Daniel know about the ownership structure? Not much. Are you sure? Yes. Robert looked at me. Because somebody has been asking questions. My stomach tightened. Who? People connected to Daniel. What kind of questions? About the trust. I sat back. Why? Robert's expression didn't change. That's what we're trying to determine. He slid a folder across the desk. I opened it. Inside were copies of corporate records, board resolutions, ownership documents, loan agreements, and one document that made me stop breathing for a moment. It was a preliminary proposal for a corporate restructuring. Daniel's signature appeared at the bottom. I read the document twice, then a third time. What is this? Robert leaned back. A plan to reorganize the company. Into what? A new holding structure. Why? That is the question. I turned another page. A list of entities appeared. Several were unfamiliar. One name caught my attention. Redwood Strategic Holdings. I looked at Robert. Redwood Strategic Advisory. He nodded. Same people. My hands went still. So the consulting company is connected to this. We believe so. Who owns it? We don't have the complete picture yet. I looked down at the paperwork again. Does Daniel know I can stop this? Robert didn't answer. He didn't need to. I understood. Daniel thought I was retired. He thought I was a former owner. He thought the company was effectively his. And someone had apparently convinced him that the family trust was either irrelevant or controllable. I closed the folder. Don't tell him I know. Robert frowned. Tom. Don't. You need to be careful. I know. I'm serious. So am I. I stood. Robert looked at me for a long moment. Then he asked the question I had been avoiding. What are you going to do? I looked toward the window. Outside, Chicago moved beneath us. Cars. People. Buildings. A city that never seemed to notice when someone's life quietly changed. I don't know yet, I said. And that was the truth. I didn't want revenge. Not yet. I wanted to understand. Because if Daniel was simply making reckless business decisions, I could deal with that. But if he was deliberately trying to move company assets into entities connected to himself, that was different. That was betrayal. And betrayal becomes especially dangerous when the person betraying you is sitting at your daughter's dinner table. For the next 3 weeks, I said nothing. I didn't call Daniel. I didn't confront Emily. I didn't tell the board. Instead, I started reviewing everything. Robert obtained additional records. Margaret went through financial transactions. And I began noticing a pattern. Redwood wasn't the only outside company. There were 3 others. Different names. Different addresses. Different services. But they shared something. The same registered agent. The same bank. And, in one case, the same executive who had once worked directly for Daniel. I printed the records. I put them in a plain black binder. Then I locked the binder in the bottom drawer of my desk. I didn't tell anyone what I had found. Not even Emily. Because there was one question I still couldn't answer. Was Daniel stealing from the company? Or was he preparing to take control of it legally? The difference mattered. And then, one Friday afternoon, I received a phone call from someone I hadn't spoken to in almost 2 years. His name was Frank Morales. Tom, he said, I need to ask you something. Go ahead. Did you know Daniel fired me because I refused to approve something? I sat up. What's something? There was a pause. A transfer. To where? I don't know. Frank. I only saw the paperwork once. What did it say? Another pause. Then he said something that changed the entire direction of my investigation. It wasn't a transfer of money, Tom. I waited. It was a transfer of equipment. What equipment? Frank's voice dropped. Your equipment. He continued. The manufacturing division in Indiana. I felt the room grow strangely quiet. I know. Then what exactly was being transferred? Frank swallowed. The paperwork said the facility was being leased to another company. For how long? 20 years. I stood from my chair. 20 years? Yes. Who was the tenant? Frank gave me the name. I wrote it down. Then I stopped. Because I recognized it. It was one of the companies connected to Redwood. I looked at the black binder sitting on my desk. For the first time, I understood what Daniel was doing. He wasn't simply stealing money. He was slowly moving pieces of the company somewhere else. And if the plan succeeded, by the time anyone noticed, there might not be much left to take back. I called Robert. He answered on the second ring. I know about the Indiana facility, I said. Silence. Then, ow, Frank. Robert exhaled. Tom, you need to come in. I'll be there Monday. No. His voice was unusually firm. Come now. 4:37 p.m. Why? Because I just received something. What? I can't explain it over the phone. I grabbed my coat. Send me the address. I already did. I checked my phone. There was an email from Robert. One attachment. One sentence in the message. You need to see who signed the authorization. I opened the attachment while standing in my kitchen. And when I saw the signature at the bottom of the page, I realized this wasn't just about Daniel anymore. Because the person who had authorized the transfer wasn't my son-in-law. It was someone much closer to me. Someone I had trusted for years. And suddenly, the question wasn't whether Daniel was planning to take my company. The question was, who had been helping him do it? Robert opened the door before I had a chance to knock. He looked older than he had that morning. Not physically. Something in his face had changed. Come in, he said. I followed him into the conference room. A single sheet of paper was lying on the table. I recognized the company letterhead immediately. Robert pointed toward the signature. I stared at it. Then I sat down. The signature belonged to Margaret Shun, my accountant, my friend. The woman who had balanced Carter Industrial Solutions books through expansions, lawsuits, recessions, and 2 attempted buyouts. What did she sign? I asked. Robert sat across from me. An authorization allowing the restructuring team to begin transferring certain operating assets. I looked at him. Without my approval? Yes. Ow! That is what we need to establish. I picked up the paper. Margaret's signature was unmistakable, but something bothered me. I turned the page over. Where is the original? Robert shook his head. This is a copy. Then I want the original. I've already requested it. This afternoon. And they haven't responded. I leaned back. Call Margaret. I did. What did she say? Robert looked uncomfortable. She said she had no idea what I was talking about. I looked down at the signature again. That was impossible. Either Margaret was lying, or someone had forged her name. But Robert wasn't finished. There's one more thing. He opened another folder. Inside was a series of emails. The first one was from Daniel. The date was 8 months earlier. The subject line read, Project Lantern, Ownership Transition. I read the first few messages. Daniel was discussing a plan to shift company contracts, equipment, and selected client relationships into a new holding structure. But there was one phrase that appeared repeatedly. Upon final approval from the trustee, I stopped. The trustee? Robert nodded. They were waiting for your signature. I never gave it. No. Then how are they moving forward? Robert pointed to another document. Their plan was to create the appearance that approval had already been secured. I looked up. Ow! Through a board resolution. Forged. Not exactly. He slid another paper across the table. Signed by Daniel. Signed by 2 board members. And countersigned by Margaret. I stared at the page. It wasn't my signature. It was Margaret's. But there was something else. A handwritten note in the margin. I recognized the handwriting. Mine. Except I had never written it. I looked at Robert. Someone has been building a paper trail. Yes. And they intended to use it if I challenged the transfer. Yes. He said silently, all those years of building the company. All those years of trusting people. And somewhere along the way, my son-in-law had decided that the best way to inherit my work was to make me irrelevant while I was still alive. But there was another question. Why had Margaret's name appeared? Robert must have seen it on my face. We've contacted a forensic document examiner. Do you think she was involved? I don't know. I wanted to believe she wasn't. But hope isn't evidence. And I had spent too many years building a company based on evidence to start abandoning that principle now. The next morning, I met Margaret at a quiet restaurant far from the city. She arrived 10 minutes early. She looked exhausted. When she sat down, she didn't touch the coffee I ordered for her. Tom, she said, I owe you an explanation. I didn't answer. She looked at me. Then she began to cry. Not dramatically. Just quietly. The kind of crying that happens when someone has been holding something inside for too long. Daniel found out about my husband's medical debt, she said. My expression changed. He threatened you? He didn't threaten me directly. That isn't what I asked. She looked down. He said if I didn't cooperate, he'd make sure the bank discovered the guarantees I'd signed. I understood. Fear had become leverage. What did you sign? Nothing knowingly illegal. Margaret. She looked at me. I signed documents I was told were temporary. What documents? Internal authorization forms. Preliminary restructuring papers. Nothing that, at the time, appeared to transfer ownership. But they used your signature. I am your daughter. I know. Then trust me. I looked at her. I'm trying. She left without hugging me. That night, I sat alone in the kitchen. Elaine's old coffee mug was still on the second shelf. I had kept it there for years. I stared at it. And for the first time since my wife died, I wondered whether I had made the same mistake with Emily that I had made with Daniel. Had I mistaken silence for protection? Maybe. But there was no time left for uncertainty. 2 weeks later, Daniel called a special board meeting. The agenda was simple. Finalize the restructuring. Transfer the Indiana facility. Approve the new holding structure. And ratify the ownership transition. He had brought in outside counsel, 3 investment representatives, and 2 additional directors. He believed the meeting would end with him in control. He was right about one thing. It would change everything, just not in the way he expected. The morning of the meeting, I walked into the company's headquarters through the front entrance for the first time in years. The receptionist stood immediately. Mr. Carter? I smiled. Still remember me? She smiled back. Everyone does. I took the elevator upstairs. When the doors opened, several employees turned. Some looked surprised. Others smiled. One older employee actually stood. Good to see you, Tom. I nodded. Good to see you too. Daniel was already in the boardroom when I entered. He looked at me. For perhaps the first time in years, I saw genuine uncertainty in his face. You're here. Yes. You weren't on the agenda. I am now. The room went quiet. Robert entered behind me. Then Margaret. And finally, an independent forensic accountant. Daniel's face hardened. What is this? I took the chair at the head of the table, the one he believed belonged to him. Let's begin. Daniel looked at the other directors. Mr. Carter doesn't have operational authority. I turned toward him. I don't need operational authority. I placed a folder on the table. I have ownership authority. No one moved. Daniel laughed once. Nervously. No. I opened the first document. You transferred company equipment without authorization. I placed a second document beside it. You created consulting arrangements with companies connected to executives working for you. A third. You prepared a restructuring intended to move company assets into a holding structure you controlled. Daniel shook his head. This is ridiculous. I looked at him. I haven't shown you anything ridiculous yet. I nodded toward Margaret. She stood. Her hands trembled, but her voice didn't. I signed these documents. Daniel stared at her. Margaret. She looked at him. You told me they were temporary. Daniel's face tightened. You knew exactly what they were. No. She held up a folder. I know what you told me. Then the forensic accountant spoke. We compared the creation dates, metadata, and original files. Daniel looked toward the lawyer beside him. She suddenly became very interested in her notes. The accountant continued. Several documents were altered after signature. Silence. Daniel shook his head. You can't prove I did that. No, the accountant said. I don't have to. He opened another file. Because your system logs show who accessed the originals. Daniel stopped moving. I watched him read the report. His face changed. First confusion. Then disbelief. Then fear. You accessed these after hours, the accountant continued. I didn't. We have the login records. My login was compromised. Robert placed a report on the table, then explained the two-factor authentication. Daniel said nothing. I opened one final folder. This is from the bank. I looked directly at him. The account receiving payments from Redwood Strategic Holdings belongs to a trust registered to Daniel Harper. Emily's maiden name had once been Carter. Daniel had used his own separate trust. He had hidden it behind multiple entities. For months. The room was silent. Daniel looked around. That's not what you think. I said nothing. He turned to the board. You need to understand what happened here. No one responded. He looked at me. Tom. It was the first time in years he had used my name without sarcasm. I was trying to protect the company. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. From whom? Competitors. By transferring assets to yourself? It wasn't for me. Then why were you the beneficiary? He didn't answer. That was enough. The chairman finally spoke. Daniel, sit down. Daniel didn't. The chairman repeated himself. Sit down. He did. I looked around the table. I built this company with people who believed ownership meant responsibility. Then I looked at Daniel. You confused ownership with entitlement. He stared at me. What are you going to do? And it was the moment I could have destroyed him. I had enough evidence to remove him. Enough evidence to trigger legal action. Enough evidence to make sure he would never sit in another executive office again. But I remember my daughter. I remembered Noah. And I remembered something Elaine once told me. Thomas, don't ever let anger make decisions that only love should make. So I chose something else. I'm removing you as CEO. Daniel closed his eyes. And I'm initiating an independent investigation into every transaction you've approved. He looked at me. Are you pressing charges? I haven't decided. That answer frightened him more than a threat would have. Then I turned toward the board. But there's one condition. Everyone waited. Emily stays out of this. Daniel looked sharply toward me. I continued. My daughter didn't create these transactions. She didn't approve them. She doesn't deserve to lose her marriage because of choices her husband made. Daniel looked at me. For the first time, I saw shame. Not enough. But some. I stood. Your position is terminated effective immediately. Security walked in. Daniel gathered his things. He didn't argue. He didn't shout. He just looked at me. Then he said quietly, "You knew." I met his eyes. "I knew before you thought I knew." He gave a bitter smile. "That was the whole time?" "No." I shook my head. "The whole time, I was giving you opportunities to stop." He looked down. Neither of us said anything else. Daniel left the building carrying one box. That's all. Not a fortune. Not a dramatic escort. Just one cardboard box filled with a laptop, photographs, and the nameplate from his desk. The company survived. The Indiana facility remained ours. The fraudulent transfers were reversed. The board hired an interim CEO, and an independent investigation uncovered even more transactions than we initially expected. But I never felt victorious. Not completely. Because Emily stopped speaking to me for nearly 3 months. She believed I had destroyed her marriage, even after she learned the truth. She couldn't understand why I had let things continue as long as I had. One evening, she finally came to my house. She stood at the door. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she said, "Did you know he was lying to me?" I looked at her. "Yes." She started crying. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I wanted evidence. You should have trusted me." I nodded. "You're right." She looked surprised. I continued. "I was so focused on protecting the company that I forgot to protect our relationship." She stepped inside. We sat in the living room. For hours, we talked. Not about Daniel. About us. About Elaine. About all the times I'd chosen work when Emily needed me. About all the ways she had convinced herself that my silence meant I didn't care. And for the first time, we both stopped defending ourselves. That was the beginning of the repair. Not the end. The beginning. Emily eventually filed for divorce. She and Noah moved closer to me. Daniel disappeared from our lives for a while. Later, I heard he had taken a consulting position in another state. I never asked for details. I didn't need to. He had lost the thing he cared about most. Control. But I didn't take pleasure in it. That surprised me. For years, I had believed justice meant making someone feel the pain they caused. I was wrong. Sometimes justice is simply refusing to let someone else's dishonesty determine who you become. A year later, I returned to the company headquarters. The same elevator opened onto the 32nd floor. The same windows looked out over Chicago. But everything felt different. My office had been converted into a small conference room. I didn't mind. I was no longer interested in chairs, or titles, or proving who owned what. I walked past the boardroom and stopped. On the wall hung a framed photograph of the original warehouse. 3 employees, a dented delivery truck, and me, 28 years younger, standing beside a machine I had bought with money I almost didn't have. I smiled. That was where it started. Not in a tower. Not in a boardroom. In a warehouse. With people. With trust. With the belief that something built honestly could survive almost anything. I learned that a company can recover from bad numbers. It can recover from bad leadership. It can recover from a failed quarter. What is harder to rebuild is trust. And family trust is more fragile than any balance sheet. I still see Margaret sometimes. We remained friends. She never forgave herself completely for what happened. I told her she didn't need to. She made a mistake. Then she told the truth. That mattered. I still have a black binder. It's in a locked drawer in my house. Not because I'm afraid. Because it reminds me of the cost of waiting too long to speak. As for Emily, our relationship isn't exactly what it was before Daniel. In some ways, it's better. We're more honest now. We disagree. We argue. Sometimes she gets angry with me. Sometimes I get angry with her. But nobody in that family has to wonder where they stand anymore. That, I've learned, is worth more than money. People often ask what I would have done differently. My answer changes from year to year. But today, I think I know. I would have spoken earlier. Not louder. Earlier. I would have set boundaries before disrespect became normal. I would have trusted my instincts before I had documents proving what I already felt. And I would have remembered that protecting someone from the consequences of their choices isn't always kindness. Sometimes it's just delayed damage. Daniel thought the company belonged to him because he occupied the biggest office in the building. He was wrong. Not really. I was only its steward for a time. What I actually owned was responsibility for what I had built. And when that responsibility was tested, I had a choice. I could have destroyed him. Instead, I stopped him. There's a difference. One creates another cycle of revenge. The other creates an ending. And that's the lesson I carry with me now. Never mistake someone's confidence for authority. Never confuse silence with weakness. And never let the fear of losing a relationship convince you to tolerate behavior that destroys your dignity. Sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is stay calm long enough to see the truth clearly. Then act. Not out of anger. Not out of pride. But because some boundaries exist for a reason. And once someone crosses them, love doesn't require you to follow. If you've ever had someone underestimate you because they thought they knew your limits, tell me in the comments what happened. And if this story reminded you of someone who needs to hear it, share it with them. Subscribe to Father's Hidden Reckoning for more stories about family, betrayal, consequences, and the moments when people finally discover their own worth. And remember, the person who looks powerless may simply be the person who has decided not to reveal his strength yet.